So we're going to start off here. Again, thank you all for coming. It's really exciting to have you here. And my name is Karen DeWitt. I and my husband run K-9 Companions Nashville. This is George back here. George is a combat veteran, and he's had an amazing career. But he also has a service dog named Dazzle, so he can speak to that as well. I think that it's really important for us to take the first 15 minutes here to talk to you guys about all the different issues that surround service dogs. So we're going to suggest you take rapid fire notes here because we're going to go over a lot, okay? So if you get ready to do that. So my staff here will each cover an area of service dog training, kind of keep you guys awake because we know that it can kind of get to droning on, so we'll try to keep it interesting for you. So they'll introduce themselves as they speak. Okay, Mahatma Gandhi once said, "The true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members." I think that's really important because a lot of times today we get involved in all kinds of different things that distract us. But the vulnerability of people is not a political issue. It has nothing to do with race, gender. Everybody can be disabled at a certain time in their life or care for someone, a family member that is disabled. So it has nothing to do with any kind of political issues. It's a issue of humanity. And we have to really keep that in mind so that we don't let it digress into something else. So we're discussing here how service dogs help their handlers and why they need to be allowed in housing and in public places. The other thing secondarily that we're here to discuss is the problem of service dog fakery. And I'm sure all of you have seen that. It's not something that is really hidden. It's very easy for someone to look at a dog and say, that's not a service dog. It's a Chihuahua in a shopping cart. Or, it's that's not a service dog because it wouldn't be barking in the plane. And I've had stewardesses tell me, oh my gosh, you would not believe, and I don't know what to do about the fact that this dog is lunging and barking at people on the plane. That should never happen. So one of the things you should know is if there's a service dog who appears to be posing a threat to someone else or is disrupting a business, you are allowed to ask them to leave. People get really concerned about running afoul of the ADA law, but that is part of the ADA law as well. So we're going to talk about how they affect businesses as well. Our first speaker is going to talk on the business side of things. She has a therapy dog that was trained by us for her therapy business. She does physical therapy for children, but she also ran into a situation in her own office where they had somebody bringing in a dog that was unmarked as a service dog, and the woman refused to put any markings on it. Now, legally, that's one of the problems we're running into. You should have to mark your dog as a service dog. So when somebody walks into a store with a dog and it looks like a pet, of course they're going to ask the question, is that a real service dog? And then people get offended at that. So this makes no sense whatsoever. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we may be able to solve those issues to following the European model.
Hi, I'm Gracie Evans, and I'm the manager here at K-9 Companions Nashville. And I'm going to discuss some important terminology here with you today so we can be clear of some different distinctions between different types of service, therapy, and all types of animals that you can have. So a service dog, as we're talking about today, is a dog trained to do specific tasks for its handler with a physical or a psychiatric disability. And the therapy dog, which can be and is oftentimes confused with a service dog, is a dog who serves others. Examples of this would be dogs going into hospitals to comfort patients, nursing homes to comfort the elderly, funeral homes, and courtrooms to comfort victims. And an ESA, or an emotional support animal, is simply a comfort its owner who is in need of emotional support for its psychiatric issues. And ESA should have basic obedience and manners, but they oftentimes don't. Now, the term service dog can be confused and is often confused with a military or police working dog. This is due to the fact that these dogs were once referred to as service dogs. Military or police working dogs are now simply referred to as military working dogs, or MWD for short. These dogs are also referred to as police dogs or working canines. But however, in some European countries, for this reason, service dogs are now referred to as assistant dogs.
All right, I'm going to stand since I'm kind of over in this corner. My name is Claire Conway, and I'm one of the trainers here at K-9 Companions, and I'm going to be discussing the history of service dogs. So there are drawings and paintings of dogs doing service tasks that date back into ancient history. The first service dogs actually recorded in history was in the 1750s, and it was in the 1750s that the first guide dogs for the blind were actually trained in France. Then in 1916, we had the first guide dog schools in Germany open up, followed by some in Switzerland. Those were mostly established for blinded soldiers after World War I. Then in the US, we didn't have those first guide dog schools established until after the World War II, so in the 1940s. Again, that was mainly for those blinded soldiers, okay? It was not actually until the 1970s that the US service dogs didn't really catch on for people with disabilities other than blindness. So prior to that, it was mostly for people who needed a seeing eye dog, okay? The 1970s were very important to working dogs in general. This was the decade that dog trainers began to import police canines from Europe, as well as started to become interested in canine dog sports. European dog sports, excuse me. So the 1970s marked a huge increase in the use of dogs in various aspects in this country. If you can believe it, service dogs were not actually legally recognized in our country until 1990, which is not all that long ago. That is still just blows me away. And that was by Dr. Bonnie Bergen of CCI when she teamed up with then President Bush the Elder to establish ADA law, or the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now at that time, the ADA law was extremely broad. It essentially said that service dogs were allowed by federal law into most establishments with very few restrictions. One of the crazy things that it also stated was that the only thing you could ask was if it was a service dog. So if the handler said it's a service dog, no one could question that, which is crazy. Obviously that's going to cause some issues. So over time, people basically caught on to the fact that they could just slap a service dog vest on an animal and it would have to be allowed to go anywhere. Obviously, most of us have seen that in public ourselves. This is what initially started to create a lot of that service dog fakery that we see running around today. There was also confusion caused when officials started to confuse service dogs with emotional support dogs, or excuse me, emotional support animals. The term emotional support animal came into being when HUD properties began to make exceptions for people with doctor's notes stating that they needed to have an animal for their emotional well-being. These animals began to be referred to as emotional support animals. The doctor or therapist note was enough to allow the dog to be kept in housing that otherwise would have not allowed dogs to be kept there. For a time, these dogs became confused with service dogs and were even allowed on airplanes. Again, unintended consequences that resulted in all kinds of animals being allowed on planes as emotional support animals. I'm sure people have seen on the news that people have claimed that snakes, lizards, fish, birds, pretty much anything out there was their emotional support animal. And so something had to be done. Therefore, in 2008, the ADA law was amended by then President Bush the Younger to state that service dogs are defined as dogs trained to do tasks for their handlers. This also resulted in the Department of Transportation banning ESA animals on their flights and requiring a form to be filled out asking people who trained the dog and what tasks they are trained to perform. Unfortunately, since that time, even though airlines have created entire departments to follow up on this, still half of the animals flying are flying as owner trained. This has been reported to us personally when we have been contacted to verify that we trained a dog that is represented to be trained by K-9 Companions Nashville. Pet dog owners have simply learned to Google tasks and write them down. In some cases, as has happened to us, they're Googling who trains service dogs in their area, and on the TSA form are claiming that a service dog training organization has trained their dog when they have never even seen the dog or the handler. We have even had an owner who was ballsy enough to give out a false phone number and claim to be us on the phone number. Yeah, that, talk about, pretty crazy. Luckily, the airline official was smart enough to find our real contact number and contact us. But that just tells you the lengths that some people are willing to go. Owner training is not a good option, as only 1% of owners can really train a service dog. Those owners that can are going to have already had training either through working with dogs, through a business, or in competition. Even people who have experience handling dogs are not going to have the skills to train service dogs. For instance, a police canine handler is unlikely to be able to train service dog tasks.
Hi, my name is Emily Seifert, and I'm the training director here at this facility, and I'm going to discuss government standards with you guys. So in 2012, after a child was attacked by a pit bull that was being represented as a service dog on a military base, the military recognized that the ADI, Assistant Dogs International standards, are the standards that should be used for training dogs. These standards include the following: on and off-leash obedience, a canine good citizen test, proper socialization, a minimum of 3 service dog tasks done for the owner that they cannot do for themselves, and proper public access training. This is the standard that we hold ourselves to here at K-9 Companions Nashville. This is in fact the standard that every service dog training program in the country should be holding themselves to. There are only 2 systems of training for service dogs. One is the model that many nonprofits use. This model is to train the dog first for 2 years and then pair them up with the owner, who is given anywhere from 3 days to 2 weeks of training with the dog. This model is necessary for someone who does not have the physical ability to be involved in training the dog. Then there is the model that we use here at our facility. This model is to start training the dog and the handler together. The process lasts about 2 years. This means that the handler will be much better trained than a handler that only receives a 3-day to 2-week education. A short education is likely to result in the dog's training unraveling over time. As previously stated, someone who cannot physically be involved in the actual training of the dog, there is a greater challenge of being able to create a good handler. This is not to say that this option should be eliminated, as it is the only option for someone with limited ability to work with the dog, especially in the case that they live alone or don't have a spouse to help them out. The business of dog training is currently being handled like a trade organization. Dog trainers generally teach other dog trainers. It's a trade handed down to employees, and as we have here, there are also a few schools that exist in the country for the purpose of training trainers. Because of this, no one holds the trainer to the proper standards. The trainer themselves has to care enough to do the training properly. That is another issue that needs to be discussed, but I'll move on. The first issue that needs to be addressed is how to tighten up the ADA laws. The best way towards figuring out a solution is looking at the European model, since Europe has dealt with this issue longer than we have here in the United States.
So let's talk about solutions, because we've talked about the problems and it helps to talk about the solutions. So let's look at what they do in Europe, because they have had to deal with this issue for twice as long as we have. and they've worked some things out. So in France, a service dog handler has to show 2 cards, 2 IDs. One is a card showing what trainer trained the dog and that the dog was certified. And the other is a state, country disability card. Those are the rules there. In Spain, the handler also has to show proof of training with an authorized trainer. They actually have just implemented that they want everybody who owns a dog in Spain to take a basic dog course, which is going way far afield. We won't talk about that at this point, but they also mandate liability insurance for the handler. There's several European countries actually that do. France does, Italy, Denmark, parts of Germany, and Spain. So there's quite a few European countries that do want the handler to have liability insurance. So you think about that. If a person has a dog out in public, and if that dog bites someone, then that person is going to have to deal with the cost of repairing that bite. So the average dog bite costs about $23,000 in this country in hospital stay. And of course, there could be anything from a small to a big dog bite, but then if the person who is bitten takes the dog handler to court, you can double that. So, look at, is it fair for people to be put at risk or their children to be put at risk for the person to have the dog in public? And especially now we're talking about a lot of the fake service dogs are the ones that are biting people as well. Now, any dog can bite someone if it's having a bad day, if the owner doesn't know that it's hurting, maybe it has a problem with a tooth or an ear infection or hip dysplasia that the owner doesn't know about, and suddenly a child just touches it from behind and gets bitten. So even with a well-trained service dog that normally is a really good boy or girl, they can become maybe older and have arthritis. So it's always a possibility. A dog is a dog, right? Even best case scenario. So we think this is a good solution. Talking to a couple of our insurance agents, Scott as one, another lady here who has a actual pit bull that is a service dog. She had to have liability insurance in her business because she works for an insurance agency. The amount, you'd be surprised, that they have to pay is $10 to $30 a month. Not bad, and we're not even talking about widespread. I would imagine, Scott, wouldn't you think those prices would go down if it was a typical thing?
Yeah, and that was a standalone policy, and so if you build it into a homeowner's existing or a renter's existing or other existing policies as a rider, it'll probably be even less than what your pit bull person had was a standalone only. So, there's an economy of scale there if it's a rider on an existing policy.
And that's $100,000 liability policy, right?
So it would way exceed the average cost of a dog bite. If it's $23,000, it way exceeds that.
Yeah. So we're talking about something that is doable. And also, a person with a service dog, the service dog does serve them mainly in the home. If they're nudging for anxiety or doing pressure on the lap for a person to calm down, those kinds of things are done in the home all the time. It's when you get into the circling, blocking their personal space and watching their back, those are public things. So the person does have a choice of whether to take the dog in public or not. So looking at the European model, in Spain, if police are called onto the scene for a service dog dispute, and they found that the service dog is being faked, there's a hefty fine. They can be charged up to 10,000 euros for faking a service dog. That does a lot to bring down the fakery itself. If the owner of an establishment does not allow a valid service dog into the establishment, they can be fined up to $3,700, not dollars, euros. I always say dollars. I always say that because our course is roughly that price. Okay, so basically the lack of credentials, it's somewhat like a police officer coming up to you, stopping you and saying, show me your license and your registration and your insurance, right? So if they can do that with a dog and the public knows that this is a requirement, then they're either going to do it right or they're not going to do it at all. So it really would help. And I actually just about a month ago had a lawyer in that was telling me, a lot of people do tell me they've been faking it. And this lawyer was sitting in front of me and saying, yeah, I've been taking my dog on planes and hotels with me. And as long as that loophole exists, I'm going to jump through it. It's so frustrating for us as service dog trainers to know that that is hurting everybody with an actual disability, because then what happens is the public turns around and says, I don't believe you, to anyone. And all of a sudden there's no way for them. Now we do provide service dog certification cards. We've got 8x10 representations of them on the walls here. The actual service dog card is the size of a license. That's a blow up that they can send ahead to airlines and hotels that wouldn't naturally take dogs. And we provide a vest with our patch on it. So that does help our service dog people, but the problem that we're running into at this point is because it's not required, it's like walking through a minefield for us, because people are kind of like, no, I don't have to do this properly because I can get away with doing it improperly. And who's paying for it? The businesses that have to deal with it, and the actual service dog people that need that dog. So it's a real problem, and we're hoping to be able to get some legislation going that will help go in this direction.